I'm going to make a simple wood-turned bowl. I got this wood from a viewer, I think it was about 7 years ago, so it's been quite a while. I brought the wood back to the shop and I cut it into pieces that I could put on the lathe. And really in doing this, it's cutting them in half, or at least finding where cutting them in half makes sense to make wood-turned things with them. So really this is a process of carving, and I'm starting out with the big chunks at this point. And I can cut off quite a bit at a time with the chainsaw and get closer to that shape quickly. And then I can kind of find the circle that I'm going to make with the lathe. And I can start to shape those pieces roughly with the chainsaw, cutting off the extra bits and get it a little closer to round. Some of these pieces I got even more round on the bandsaw, but with this one I just used the chainsaw. So it was fairly rough going on the lathe. And it's always a little bit of a challenge in deciding where to put the faceplate, finding sort of the center of mass so it'll turn nicely. I guess compromising between what looks like the center of the form and the center of the piece I'm going to make and the center of mass of the object before I start turning. And sometimes those can be a little different. So it can be a little unbalanced at first. So the turning goes slow in the beginning to get off the big extra pieces, the big lumpy bits. But as it gets more and more round, the turning speed can be turned up and it goes faster and faster. So I did the outside, or sort of the bottom first. I got that to a somewhat of a form. And there were a few pieces that were easier to just cut off instead of turn off. I found I really like turning wet green wood before it's dried, as it cuts really nicely and it makes the turning go quickly. So you can find the shape and the form fairly fast, which makes it really fun. I have a little bit of a problem where I like doing the green turning, so I've done a lot of that, but then I end up with all these dried bowl blanks that need to be finished. And it's not as fun doing the finishing part because it has to be a little more precise and it's harder to cut the wood and it's just dustier. I made a tenon on the bottom that'll fit the chuck. Then I can take the piece off and take the faceplate off. I don't think I've ever had a faceplate separate from the workpiece on the lathe. The screws really do hold the wood onto the faceplate really well. I've had the workpiece come off of the chuck a few times, but never off of a faceplate. If I've sized the mortise right, I can fit the chuck in there. And you want to have the chuck as close to closed as possible, because then the chuck jaws are closer to a circle and they'll contact more of the inside of the mortise and hold the piece better. I can start doing the inside of the bowl now, and it's just a matter of removing all of this material. I always get comments about getting one of these bowl hollower things, which does sound intriguing. The only thing I don't like about that is it kind of forces you into a particular shape. I've always just removed the center of the bowl by carving it out. I'm pretty sure I put wax paint on this, but I don't think I filmed that.
7 years later.
So these box elder bowls have been sitting now for, I think, 7 years. So I think that's plenty of time for them to dry out. So it's time to finish turning these, especially this one. This will make a nice big sort of shallow, almost platter, but bowl, I guess. What I'm thinking I'm going to do is, this is almost round, but I need to make it, I think, rounder. So instead of trying to put this on the lathe again, I'm going to cut this on the CNC. So I'll make a circle in the bottom, and that'll take the chuck for the lathe, so I can finish turning this. So as this is dried, it has warped a little bit, and just like the slabs that I've done recently, I can shim up the low spots and make the piece sit flat on the CNC table. And then I can really just hold the rim with my hold downs and carve out the top center of the bottom of the bowl. And I just made a cylinder and I cut that out. So I got a nice flat bottom and nice round sides. Then because the rim wasn't very even, you can kind of see in the close part of the bowl here where it drops down, I cut off a plane on the top just to get that rim to be a little more even. My hope is that this will help the chuck hold on to the bowl a little better. And it'll make the bottom of the bowl more even, or a little flatter. So I think with really light objects, I'll put the chuck on the lathe first and then put whatever it is I'm turning into the chuck. But when things are a little bigger, I can put the chuck into the object or the bowl first and then put the whole assembly onto the lathe. So the chuck and the bowl will be as even as possible. And I worked on the outside first, got that nice and round, and got very close to the final form. Then I can work on the rim and start to work on the inside. At this point, it's really just getting it round. And then once it's round, I've sort of found the maximum workpiece that's within the warped bowl that I took off the shelf. Then once it's round, I can find the final form, sort of subtly changing the curves of the shape. There's a little bit of a challenge on the inside of bowls I've found. Because it's on the inside, it's hard to get that curve to be one single shape. You'll get sort of lumpy bits. And the scraper helps with this. But what I'll do sometimes is, with the bowl stopped, I can mark with a pencil sort of where the high places are. And when the bowl is turning, I can see those marks, so I can see where I have to remove. You can't really feel the shape while it's turning as well as you can while it's stopped. But you can't turn it when it's stopped. So it's kind of like a memory thing where you have to find the bumps and then remember where they are. And I was measuring how deep it was. I didn't want to go too deep and have a hole in the bottom. So I can put a ruler or even just any object into the bowl and kind of look across the two rims, and I can see how deep the bowl is. And I can do a little more turning. I wanted the rim to be a little thinner. And trying to do nice, even, full motions across the width of the bowl helps with the curve being a nice shape instead of being lumpy or having ridges, I guess. It's nice to get a thin rim, but it's oftentimes difficult because there isn't much supporting that outer edge. So it's a good idea to turn the outer edge first and get that to its final thickness while it has support from the rest of the bowl. And then do the inside, or sort of the bottom, or the part closer to the center. Then I could start to sand. I've been experimenting more with using my grinder to sand. It works great on the outside. It's a little harder on the inside as it tends to rough up the edge of the sanding disc. Whereas on the outside, I can use the middle of the sanding disc, so it lasts a long time. And this box elder's pretty soft, so it cuts and sands nicely. Then once I have it sanded, I can put finish on, and I'm putting walnut oil on this. So at this, you put it on somewhat thick, and then you let it sit for a few minutes, and then you wipe off the extra, so it can sort of soak into the wood. And it definitely soaks in a lot more on the end grain, which includes the burl on here, because that's sort of end grain too. And I did the outside first, and then I did the inside. And it looked really nice. So I let this dry for a few days, and then I got my random orbital sander out with, I think, 400 grit sandpaper, or maybe 320, something like that. Sort of lightly sanded it again. And I wiped it down with mineral spirits to get the sawdust off. So if you're using an oil-based finish, you can use mineral spirits to sort of clean up the surface before you put the finish on. Then I can put a second coat of walnut oil on. Now it's got a really nice finish. I tend to gravitate towards flatter finishes. I'm not so big into shiny. To me, it's nice when the finish brings out the figure of the wood, but it doesn't look like there's a thick layer of something on it. It just looks like the wood. And that's how it came out. This one came out really nice. It's rather large and somewhat shallow, but it's got really nice figure in it. It doesn't have any of the red that the previous one that I did has, although it has some dark brown. But it turned out really nice. Thanks for watching.